all of what the work they've done has been since 2009 to try to give Iowans the tools and the research information and the best science available to help us prevent future flood damage. So you've got to meet the director, Vitek Krajewski. I had to work long and hard to learn how to pronounce that.
I practiced all morning when I was pronouncing it correct.
And he has learned that my name is Hogue and not Hog. That took him a while longer.
That took me a lot of morning as well.
Yes. And then Larry, what's your job now?
I'm the Edwin B. Green Chair.
He got kicked upstairs.
I'm a faculty member in hydraulics, but I served as the director of the hydraulics laboratory here for 13 years, during which it was the time when Senator Hogue and Jaworski came to visit about the University of Iowa and our expertise. And so maybe just a little background, if I could.
Yep.
So this institute will celebrate its 100th anniversary next year. And so the University of Iowa began doing research along the banks of the Iowa River in 1920. And is known worldwide as perhaps the top program in the world, but certainly in the top 3 worldwide to study hydraulics, hydrology, and water resources. And I was appointed the 7th director in 2004.
What were they trying to figure out in 1920?
You know, the first work was to develop simple relationships between the depth of water and the discharge or flow in cubic feet per second of small dams. And so we have a little dam right outside the laboratory here, and they did a series of measurements to try to create this stage discharge relationship, which is now used at USGS stream gauges and rating curves and Corps of Engineering structures all across the country.
And Senator Bennet, if I can interrupt, I want to introduce Dave Lash.
Hey, Dave.
He is the district director for Congressman
Nice to
Lomsat.
see you.
Hey, Dave.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
So when the Iowa the Iowa City Cedar Rapids delegation came here to the University of Iowa, it was to IIHR, recognizing that at that time we had some 90 years of history in this broad area and wanted to know what we could do to help. And then, of course, that led to a request from the legislature to create the nation's only state-funded flood center. And so I think what we'd like to do today is spend about 15 minutes going through a presentation. We don't want to bore you with too many technical details, but we really want to show you some of the tools and technologies developed here. Vitek will lead us through that, and then we'd have a fair amount of time for open discussion.
Great.
Water-related issues.
Yeah, I'm ready. So it all started with this. See the rapids.
Okay, I got to interject here because now we're talking about my district.
Right.
This is the Cedar River Banks normally right here. That's the National Czechoslovak Museum. The Iowa Corn Feed, which you attended yesterday,
Yeah.
that is this block right here totally inundated underwater.
Yep. Amazing.
Yeah, so this was the
You really should
situation.
take better care of your district. I'm not an expert in this stuff.
Well, that's why we had a singular focus on the
That's
prevention of
it.
future flood damage. Because we're never going to let this happen again, are we, VTech?
Yeah, no, that's, here in Iowa City it wasn't much better. We have a river just outside of the window here. We were evacuated from this building for 10 weeks and had to operate somewhere else. Well, again, to give credit to the wisdom of our legislators, in the following session, they came up with this House 5, and I just highlighted the key words, here, but basically they put us to work. So they recognize that at this university, at this institute, there is relevant expertise, and they said, okay, so show us what we can do. And so we went to work. So again, monitoring, because there was lack of information, improving forecasting, develop inundation, mapping, all these kind of, standard, things that were
Had you guys
lacking,
been doing
here.
inundation mapping before this?
No, not so much, but the basic background behind it is mathematical hydraulic models.
Mhm.
So we certainly do that kind of work.
Yeah, so that's our core expertise here at this institute: river mechanics, hydraulics, fluid mechanics, in a broader, sense. So this was like nothing, new. So one thing that we had to be careful about is to fulfill the requirements of FEMA for these maps to be then later approved. And,
So normally what would happen in a state, if FEMA came in and said, we're going to remap all the flood maps for the state, they would send money, through community development block grant funds or others to the state. The state would hire a bunch of contractors or consultants, maybe half a dozen. They would all go out and develop maps, and they would submit something that would either be a paper file or an electronic file. And then 10 years later, if the state needs to be remapped because of changing climate or changing land use, they would be kind of starting from ground zero again. What we decided when we got involved in the statewide mapping project was, should we do this? Do we have special expertise above what the general engineering consulting firms do? The answer to that was yes. And what we could do is we could create a digital mapping system. So 10 years from now, if Iowa needs to be remapped, all the data is in one form, in one database, in one system. So rather than spending the initial $15 million again and again and again, we should be able to do it for a much lower cost. The second part of having done that mapping project is the actual data itself. So we've mapped the 2-year, the 5, 10, the 25, 50, 100, 200, 500-year extents. And we can intersect that with land use, crop acres, critical infrastructure, schools, hospitals, all those pieces of information, and start to think about it from a greater policy perspective of how are we working and living and using floodplains.
Right.
And should we be thinking about changes to that?
so I'll come back to this shortly. So we went to work. So flood monitoring. So again, there was an acknowledged lack of sensors during the 2008. So briefly, people didn't know what was going on, and so we addressed this through good engineering. So we developed these sensors here in the lab. From the concept to the engineering design, to the implementation, to the operation. So 250 of them and counting. And so this is the map. So the green ones are USGS, the blue ones are our sensors, the 250, and the red ones are requested by communities.
So how many of the dots on there would have been there prior to '09?
Or, maybe,
The green ones.
yeah, the green ones. Right. Probably fewer, actually less than what you see
Yeah.
here.
So the green ones were about 140 in 2009. We've added 250, so that's 400, and we have a request for another 100.
Yeah, the red ones, yeah. So anyway, so people like the information that these provide, so they want more. Okay, so that was one element, monitoring. So the next is mapping. So as Larry said, we developed these maps for the whole state, everywhere. So I'm showing here only the map for Cedar Rapids, again, and all the little dots are structures that are in this particular floodplain. And for these structures, we have information from federal sources on the cost of the potential damage that this kind of inundation would have caused. And then in the lower corner, a quick accounting for all of this, so you can see that this is, millions and millions of dollars, and so it is that kind of information that we provide, and this is open to the public, so people can go there and see this.
So in this particular case, it says stage, 34.5 feet. There's a slider bar on the right-hand side. So across the slider bar, anybody can go there and slide that left or right. So when the USGS says the stage is going to be 28 feet or 30 feet or 26 feet, you can slide it left or right and immediately know the number of buildings affected, the structural damage, and the content losses. This is the kind of assemblage of information that sits out in a lot of different places within our federal and state governments, but yet we're the glue that really brings it all together.
Yeah, so, and we have these maps available for many communities, and then other maybe less detailed maps for everywhere in Iowa.
And although, we won't go to demonstrate the online system, here you can zoom down all the way to the single residential block, And you can click on your home that's in the inundated area, and it will tell you the depth of water outside your house for this stage. So now folks know, hey, I need to move things, anything greater than 3 feet off the ground need to be moved, or my sandbag wall needs to be 3 feet high, or whatever.
If you want to see all of this, we'll keep you here. Well, so the same, maps. This is a screenshot of a local TV channel. And so these people recognize the value of these maps and they want to share them with the public, this way. We have a nice, story about 2016 where there was almost a repeat of 2008. So it just happened that the flood crest was predicted to come over the weekend. And on Friday afternoon, when people went home and they all accessed our system, the system crashed. And it crashed because Google allows only for a certain number of transactions. So, but we recognized this, we gave them a credit card, and everything was good, so they like, the money. So, and these maps played a key role in the city developing the protection, measures and sandbagging and pesca barriers, and so forth.
So just, Senator Bennet, just to kind of on the background there, we had never had a flood in Cedar Rapids above, the river level was 21 feet. In 2008, we went over 31 feet. It was 10 feet higher than anything we'd ever experienced before. And it was,
What month was it?
that was June 11th, 12th, and 13th of 2008. And then in 2016, we had the biggest flood, second biggest flood we've ever had. It went to 22 feet. It was in September. Totally unprecedented. And even last year, we set the record for the biggest flooding ever in October. Because normally September and October are dry in Iowa.
Right.
But in 2016, there was 14 inches of rain. When I was a kid, we thought a big rain was 3 inches. Right? We had 14 inches of rain in a couple counties upriver from Cedar Rapids. This wall of water was coming down. And we dodged a bullet because instead of the 25-foot flood forecast from the National Weather Service, it stopped raining. We got a break on the weather. It ended up being 22 feet, still the second biggest flood in Cedar Rapids history, but it allowed us our 4 miles of temporary HESCO barriers on both sides of the river. They worked. This year, Davenport and Burlington, facing the longest flooding in those cities' history on the Mississippi River, their HESCO barriers, temporary flood protection, failed. And why that is, I can't say conclusively. I think at this point, I think it's being looked at. But the fact is, both cities experienced the longest floods in their histories, and that's going back almost 180 years, right?
Well, New Orleans, the Weather Channel had a fact last week. They were at 185 days of being at a flood stage. Since January 6th of this year, New Orleans, or Baton Rouge, been at flood stage, and it's broken the record by 50 days. The last record was 1927.
I was down there last week, or July 4th week.
Were you?
Spent 3 or 4 days in the Delta, and I watched Marietta, Arkansas, a little town there. We went through Mississippi and ended up on the Gulf Coast. And on July 4th, they were having to close the resorts because of the phosphorus that's out there and the red tide that's coming up. There's a couple of different things. But they're just pumping water out of the Mississippi into Lake Pontchartrain. For fear that
Bonnie Carey's open.
exactly that. And I went and stood next to Bonnie Carey and saw that the water was pouring out.
We have a whole nother story to talk about the evolution of this 2019 event. In 2011, the Missouri River was under a flood stage for over 100 days. This year in 2019, because of rain on snow and frozen soils, set all-time new record highs on the Missouri, and that's been followed by subsequent rain on top of that already charged-up system that keeps that whole valley wet. There's currently about 165,000 acres of farmlands that were protected behind the levee system. We have 53 breaches in the levee in Iowa, right? And we're looking at hundreds of millions, perhaps $1 billion of flood recovery question is, do we have the leadership to really pause and think about what do we want this valley to look like
Right.
in 25
And are we
or
gonna
50
talk
years?
about that today, or?
I'd love to talk about
Okay,
that.
good.
today.
I'd
We
love
want to
to
finish
hear
this
about
up, but
that.
I want to
Good,
come back
good.
to that. Sorry.
That's okay, that's all right. So, just to give you a quick idea about the key activities. So then, flood forecasting. So, the National Weather Service is in charge of making flood stream flow forecasts for the nation. But they only forecast a certain number of points. Here in Iowa, we have about 1,000, communities that are by streams and rivers, and they don't get any, forecast. So we developed a model, a system that makes these, forecasts on a regular basis, and the regular basis means every 15 minutes the forecasts are updated. And so, of course, it starts with the rainfall. We calculate, runoff, and we move that water through the system of streams, and rivers. And so, even for the communities, like here, the one in the middle, somewhere, when there is no stream gauges, so there is nothing to refer to, we develop some kind of an index that talks to the flood potential, and we communicate, that index to the public. So it's all open to the public, presented in this way that is fairly intuitive. So, well, I removed all the equations that describe the
Oh, too
system.
bad. I was
So,
gonna-
yeah.
You're gonna check
Solve.
us.
So we solve about 2 million equations in 10 minutes to make these, forecasts. And so our computers run around the clock, here. So to bring all that information together from these grid sensors, from the maps, and from this forecasting, system, we had to develop some platform for dissemination of that information. So we call it Iowa Flood Information, System, or IFIS. So everybody in Iowa knows IFIS. And these are different entry points to the system. So for example, here we show, this is the hydrograph in Des Moines about a year ago during a flash flood, there.
The Ankeny, Urbandale,
Yes.
they had 10 inches of rain, flooded
5,000 structures.
5,000 structures in Ankeny, Iowa got flooded from one of these free flash floods.
So you can see how fast the hydrograph was rising, and then there is a gap because the sensor got submerged. So, see, because there's this
Wow.
high flood level, so there is a gap. And
Is that one of your sensors, VTech?
Yeah, of course.
So during the flood of '08, we did not have an operating USGS sensor between Waterloo and Cedar Rapids, which is 40 miles. And then our sensor in Cedar Rapids got knocked out. And so the technology that can go on all these bridges that they've developed is just totally expanded what can be read and measured and monitored, so we know what's happening. It really helps on the flash flood on the little creeks.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And these sensors are installed with the operational system and information system behind it for $3,500 a sensor. USGS, if you want to go put a new sensor out there, you're looking at $20,000. So that is significantly less cost, and we've put 250 of these out.
So yeah, so people who don't believe in forecasts, they can just monitor these devices. But these devices and the data that they provide, together with all these equations that I was talking about, they certainly improve the forecasts everywhere. Well, also this platform, this IFIS, provides this hydrologic, context. You see the watershed boundaries, you see the rivers, communities, sensors, and so forth. And this is, something that you don't really get to hear on TV news. They tell you about the weather, sometimes in fairly, vague, terms. And here this is designed for flood forecasting for hydrology. You can look at rainfall, everything is click, 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 move around, there's nothing that you can, mess up. And so a wealth of information, I will not be taking you through all of this, it's just, way too much. This is my favorite display. It shows what's happening in all streams and rivers, and you can step through time and see when the flood wave would arrive. So this would be a nice, to have in 2008. Well, so all these activities led to a couple of other very big projects because, people often asked us like, okay, so very nice, people, so you can do monitoring, you can do forecasting. How about stopping, these, floods? Well, that's the charge.
Prevent the future flood damage, that's
Yeah,
right, that's what we want to do.
right. So we developed this Iowa watershed approach, and so Larry will tell you more about it.
So Senator Bennet, we received some disaster recovery monies following 2008, and in that program, the state allocated about $8.8 million to look at distributed conservation practices on private lands for holding water back where it falls and reducing flooding downstream. And that reduced flooding benefits farmers as well as communities. And so we kicked that project off with a watershed down in southern Iowa, Soap Creek, the Upper Cedar, and the Turkey River of the northeast Iowa, and the middle Raccoon over in central Iowa. That experience led us to submit a proposal as a state to the National Disaster Resilience Competition. That was a combination where Housing and Urban Development had teamed up with the Rockefeller Foundation in response to recovery from Superstorm Sandy. The Atlantic Coast, you might remember, was looking for about $180 million of additional recovery money for New York, New Jersey, and Virginia. So HUD went and did a clawback process and assembled $500 million. The Rockefeller Foundation contributed $500 million if they would add resilience to this competition. Only jurisdictions that had presidential disaster declarations in 2011, 12, and 13 were eligible. The state of Iowa was one of those. We submitted a pre-proposal to the competition. 63 other jurisdictions did as well. Iowa was the last, the 40th invited for full proposal submission. And at the time of the invitation, the governor's office reached out to VTEC and I and asked if we would help with preparing the state proposal. And we said, sure, we'd be happy to help. What do you mean by help? They said, would you write it? So we wrote it. That led to us assembling a team across the state of Iowa focused on urban stormwater management in Dubuque, Coralville, and Storm Lake, so 3 areas impacted by floods, and 8 watersheds from the far northeast corner, upper Iowa, to the east and west Nishnabotna and southwest Iowa. We submitted the proposal and were awarded $96,887,177. About $40 million for urban infrastructure, stormwater management, and about $40 million for this rural conservation project. We're building.
Well, that's tremendous.
We're building wetlands, farm ponds, reconnected floodplains to improve flooding or reduce flooding. But because we can't separate water quantity and water quality, we're also building saturated buffers, bioreactors, and other nitrate and phosphorus removing practices. Those two together, we think, provide a more resilient Iowa. And so we're just about 2.5 years into that program. We've allocated well over half of the money available for the conservation practices. We've just started the construction because we did hydrologic assessment, planning, and developed a local governance structure called the Watershed Management Authority for each one of these watersheds. We'll close that project out in about 2 years. The state of Iowa was the 4th largest recipient in that competition, and in HUD's award letter said, we were the 4th largest because of the uniqueness of the approach shown in Iowa. All of the other jurisdictions, like New York, which was the largest recipient, their approach to resilience was a flood wall, barriers against sea surge. None of it had this broader perspective. Not only do we build these practices on private lands, but we get local cost share. We started with a 75-25 ratio where we would provide 75% of the funding, a local landowner provided 25%. But with the softening in the farm economy over the last couple of years and commodity prices being very low, we went back to HUD and we asked for variance in our proposal to go to 90-10. So the farmer still has a contribution, and that contribution is not to protect them, it's to protect people downstream.
And on average, what does that contribution look like?
Yes. So, we have small projects that are kind of, 4 to 5 acre farm ponds. Those are about 50,000, so the farmer puts in 5,000. But we've got a project in the Middle Cedar that's a complex, 2-wetland complex that's going to really have a tremendous benefit in water quality. That project's about $1 million. acres. And so it's on 3 different farms, so those 3 farmers together will come up with $100,000. As we say when we go out and describe this to the public, we don't have an urban agenda, we don't have a rural agenda, we have a science agenda. And we have a real need to make Iowa a more resilient state. And so oftentimes when we're working in Iowa as the flood center, we're widely welcomed across the state, and all the flood related work that we do. When we start to work in the area of water quality, it becomes much more difficult. Water quality in some cases and in some places has become very politicized. Water is one of the commons in our opinion. It's like air, it's like the sun. We should all have access to available, fresh, and clean water, for recreation and drinking water. And I would say that we're in a bit of a crisis.
What do you see as the path to depoliticize that?
Well, again, I think it has to be led with science, but we need stronger leadership that takes the scientific data that are collected by organizations and academic institutions like ours and brings it forward.
Does that look like a map where you've got water quality monitors all over the place, just like those water quantity monitors are all over the place?
And we do. And so we run the nation's largest real-time continuous water quality monitoring network. So we're monitoring about 80 locations in Iowa. It's not 400, but 80 locations in Iowa. And if you look at all the nitrate sensors in the U.S., about 40% of them are in this state. So we assembled that network of water quality sensors, working with the Iowa legislature and other partners, and are starting to really look at design of wetlands, design of practices, and the effectiveness of practices. The harder part of the story is this. You might be aware of the Gulf hypoxia and the Gulf Hypoxic Task Force, and the need to reduce nutrient loading to the Gulf. The Hypoxic Task Force in the early 2000s put a goal out there of a 45% reduction in nutrients to the Gulf by 2015. But 2015 has come and gone. And not only did we not reduce our nutrient load in the Gulf, it continues to rise. So they moved the target out to 2035, 45% reduction by 2035, with a 20% reduction in 2025. In Iowa, if we look from the beginning of 2000 to today, the nitrate load leaving the state is up 77%.
Over what period of time?
2000 to today. So the last less than 20 years, it's up 77%. And I will guarantee you that by 2025, when we're supposed to have a 20% reduction, the load in Iowa will have doubled. There is a need for urgency.
And what's the relationship between the trend of water leaving the state with water coming into the state in terms of?
So Iowa, remembers, bordered by 2 navigable rivers, the Missouri and the Mississippi. So that's only export. On our southern border, it's only export. On the northern border, we have a couple small watersheds that start up in Minnesota, okay, but contribute very little to the sort of nutrient load of Iowa. If we look at the Mississippi River as it dumps into the Gulf, the largest contributor of nitrate to the Gulf of Mexico is Iowa. Okay, so one way to think about this is if you were going to invest in conservation to solve the Gulf issue, the investment should be in Iowa. Okay, because we have the largest contributions. But it's a challenge, and we got to somehow kind of take that challenge head on.
One of the things I just want to emphasize though is many of the solutions to our water quality problem also a solution to the water quantity problem.
Right.
Yeah.
If you have the effective targeted deployment of the wetlands and the conservation practices in the landscape, you don't prevent future flooding, but you might shave that peak flood. And in Cedar Rapids in 2008, every foot was what, $200 million, $300 million, every 400 million, every foot up that just magnifies the damage. So if you can shave that peak flood at the same time that you clean up the water, you can really accomplish something. But it is going to require a significant investment. It's going to require.
But money in the Emergency Wetlands Program and Wetland Reserve Program. Currently in Iowa, we're farming about 250,000 acres that are within the mapped 2-year floodplain. So the mapped 2-year floodplain, we would expect to flood about every other year. So how do we come back in and make those landowners whole, right? So we don't want to, destroy them per production and put it back into an environmental survey capacity, reducing floods, improving water quality. And, that 250,000 acres has a disproportionate benefit to water quality. Okay, so we're going to target something, target the areas that flood repeatedly, because those are the areas that have the biggest export.
In 2008, we had 60,000 acres voluntarily enrolled in the EWP, the Emergency Watershed Program. And initially, the government had the federal government had enough money for 6,000 acres, 10%. Vilsack comes in, the flood was in 08, 09, Vilsack comes in as Secretary of Agriculture, he doubled that. So we got 12,000 acres into the EWP, but there were still 48,000 that had been voluntarily enrolled that wasn't funding for. So what those farmers did, they brought out the bulldozers, they scraped off all the flood debris, and they
Went back to farming.
went back to farming. Yep. But
But
sorry,
anyway,
we got VTech off his.
No, so I'm done with the key elements of our activities. Again, could talk for hours here. But this is to show that over the years we have developed a tremendous partnership with many state and federal agencies that operate in Iowa. And this is important because, when it all started, people were giving us these looks like, who are you guys? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Because, we are academics, and so we put all of that, to rest. And now there is really, nothing that is going on within, the state when it comes to flooding and water in general that we don't know about or that we are not called upon to help. And so, again, one can say, oh, Iowa, that's just one small state, 3 million people who care. I mean, except for the presidential candidates, of course, So, but
At least the ones who came.
right, yeah, that's right. No, that's right. But people have asked us, okay, so it is very nice what you are doing here. So why don't you do this in Wisconsin or Minnesota or other places? Well, we are doing all this, but for Iowa taxpayers, money. So of course, then the next thought is like, what could you do to do this nationally? That is a conversation that we also, had, and in fact, our Congressman, Lobsack, developed a piece of legislation that engages academic institutions into a small consortium. So the name of the bill is National Center for Flood Research and Education. And it's not an earmark for Iowa. It is a competitive process by design, with NOAA being the federal agency that would organize, this. And that NOAA would select an organization. So the language maybe favors Iowa, I don't know. But then together, well, we've done a lot of work. So nobody in the...
If it was an earmark, we wouldn't mind.
But like if people in our circles at least, if somebody learns out there that, oh, Iowa got this NOAA center, nobody would blink. They would say, okay, yeah, that's of course, so who else, and so, and then these two, that academic institution and NOAA, they would organize a small consortium of a few, maybe let's call it, 6 other universities that would be distributed across the country, and this is in acknowledgement that our hydrology of the country is vastly, different from place, to place. So we have coastal problems, we have mountainous problems, on and on and on. So you need that kind of, expertise that is diversified. And so there is a piece of legislation that is still awaiting some co-sponsors. I don't know if we got, any by now.
Nothing new.
Yeah. So. But anyway, it's a very concrete, example how one can take and academic expertise and put it to work for the benefit of the country. And I would, submit that we are not doing that enough. So for example, the best example is that in medicine, right? That in
Yeah.
most academic institutions there are big hospitals, and these doctors who do research on cancer and other diseases, they are also clinicians, right? In other fields, it really doesn't happen, that much. But I think that natural resources and environmental quality is something that is primed for that. But it cannot happen only through this competition that exists within these so-called science agencies like National Science Foundation or USGS or NASA, because there is this competition, there, but there is no common vision towards which to work. So again, if there was a vision and a visionary, there, who would say, you got to do this, and you guys got to do this, and you got to do this, and then we'll put it, all together for the greater, good. I think that is, the mechanism, because we are an example of that. So these guys, they trusted us. They didn't know us. They took a risk. They said, well, we'll give you some money, do something. They didn't tell us what to do.
A little bit. Stop future flood damage, VTech, that's what we told you to do. So,
Yeah, but not how.
Yeah, yeah. Right, we said that's the goal.
That's the goal,
Right.
yeah. So,
Give us the information we need.
well, and we are doing, this, but we have not become a consulting, agency. We are not a federal or even state agency. We still teach. We write proposals. We write papers. We publish them in the best, journals. So we don't compromise any of these, academic ivory tower type of, standards. We are just now very strongly motivated because now we can see the purpose that what we are doing, the applied research that we are doing is actually helping people. We have tremendous outreach, programs. So Brianna out there is our leader here. So everybody, all these 1,000 communities, I was just showing dots on the map.
Right.
But there are people living, there, and so from few hundred to few thousand, and we have activities outreaching, to them. Variety, courses, meetings, lectures, you name it, and it's, there. And so some people call us, Iowa Blood Center, you are like a PR machine, and, so I said, yeah, I'll take it, PR machine, because
Because
yeah,
we're reaching
that's-
out.
That's right, yeah, we never say no to the media, so.
Well, if you're a county engineer, you've got this bridge that washes out and you need a stream gauge upstream of it. I mean, the utility that I think a lot of local government officials have, say, emergency managers, the secondary roads engineers, the public works people, they're on this site, they're looking at this site when it's wet.
What about, does the knowledge and information that's on the site, is it leading people, is it incentivizing people to say, you know what, this is something we really need to solve regionally, we're not going to be able to do this on our own, figure out how to build those kind of.
So that's one of the wonderful things about these watershed management authorities. And so in Iowa, we have
That was legislation we passed in 2010. To authorize, to bring across county and city boundaries, bring people together.
So the local governance, in each one of these watersheds, so we've highlighted, 12 here, but there are 25 watershed management authorities established in Iowa. And so they are, at the local level, trying to make decisions or write watershed plans about what their 25-year goals are in stream flow reduction, water quality improvement. And what we overlay on top of that is the technical services. So we do.
If you're going to solve Gulf hypoxia though, if that problem's ever going to get solved, it is going to require some level of comprehensive water management throughout the entire Mississippi River Basin, which, as you know, is
A third of the country.
third or more of the country, right? And we're not, we have to, if you're going to solve that problem, which should be solved.
And that's sort of the starting point is organizing your thoughts around these watersheds.
Right. And Senator Bennet, what's been impactful about this is, I've been invited, Jack and I've been invited, to come down and speak in Louisiana and talk about this structure. That's led to a memorandum of understanding with the Water Institute of the Gulf, which is looking at coastal Louisiana restoration, of how can they create the same structure, WMAs, down in Louisiana to start doing, this kind of planning, at the same scale. That led to, me being in Galveston, Texas this spring and working with faculty at Texas A&M University as the Texas legislature was drafting legislation to create the Texas Flood Center.
They took some language from the bill that established, us.
Yeah.
So, and we talked to Texas agencies about exactly what we've been doing, here, and of course Texas is bigger and more diverse, and but they know very well about us. So people out there in the country, they know about what we have done. They are very interested. We get inquiries. President Trump, I hate flies.
You don't have them in other places in the world.
Yes, Iowa.
I want to make an economic point about this. In 2008, Iowa suffered a $10 billion flood disaster. Cedar Rapids alone was $5 billion. We're a town of 125,000. That's $40,000 per resident. We lost. I have conveyed it that we, in some ways, we lost a generation's worth of wealth, and we would still be flat on our back today without federal and state aid. It was so overwhelming. We needed the federal and state aid to come back. Had to do it, but that's extraordinarily expensive. I'm not going to tell you, watershed management is not cheap either, but it's also not money down a rat hole, right? You get investment in rural Iowa, and if you do it elsewhere, outside Iowa, rural America, right? You get the investment on the land. Every time you build a wetland, you got the contractors involved, you got the seed providers, you've got the expertise, the people who do the planning, the person who works in the watershed. I'd like to see every watershed in our state. We've got 57 Huck 8s, we've got 1,645 Huck 12s. I'd like to see us get to the point where maybe every Huck 12 has somebody who's in charge of the watershed, right? We need to deploy the resources, because if you don't do that, water quality, maybe someday it will get a little better, but Larry says it's getting worse, right? And the flood damage is not like flooding's going away. We've just been hammered, and as climate changes, all this gets worse.
How serious is the loss of topsoil as a result of this stuff?
I'll start, but I'm going to turn over to Larry. Rough terms, Iowa has lost half of its topsoil since settlement.
That feels like a pretty critical.
Yes.
Yeah, but let me add a little bit of the good news side of that story is when you go back 50 years, the Soil Conservation Commission was formed to come in and slow
Right.
the loss of
Yep.
topsoil. They came in and changed the way farmers farm. They changed the way soil comes off the land. In 50 years, we've drastically reduced and improved our topsoil loss. We could do the same thing with water and nutrients if there was a political will to do it.
Iowa, my perception on topsoil loss is generally we've stabilized it, but there are still plenty of areas where there's a 5-ton standard. Some people think the 5-ton standard for loss is too high because it replenishes. The idea is if you can limit your loss to 5 tons per acre, you stabilize it. There are some people who think 5 tons is too high, that it's actually the replenishment level is maybe 2 or 3 tons. But there are hot spots in the state where you'll have fields that lose 10, 20 tons of topsoil, right?
Well, and these rains are
And
something
and-
to do
And when you have the 14-inch rain,
Right.
we've had so many of those recently, right? And this,
Cars, riverbank.
yeah, and this was not something that, when I was a kid in Iowa in the 70s, we did not, I don't remember having those. Maybe they happen rarely. But typically, have we had a year recently where we haven't had at least a 10-inch rain somewhere? I think it's been happening every year. And so you do have a bunch of fields that are losing 10, 20 tons. And of course, with the topsoil goes a lot of nutrients, a lot of other things. soil health is a big deal. Our farmers, with the right policy, could move towards a system where they are building the carbon content of the soils, healthy soils, retaining nutrients, right? And that, you reduce the water quality problem, healthier soils hold more water, they're a bigger sponge, it would help reduce flooding, and of course the carbon sequestration benefits of holding carbon in the soils would be substantial.
And have people started to really actively think about that?
What do you think?
I mean,
I mean,
Secretary Vilsack had a plan, climate smart agriculture, you know, you have. kind of
People are
national
thinking about
vision
it.
on But no, there's no real nuts and bolts stuff.
Kevin, what do you think? Anybody else? My perception is there are people thinking about it. There are people who want to do it. Is it sort of a widespread?
Yeah.
No, I would say not, right?
Well, maybe to put it in another kind of real context for us, when we wrote the NDRC proposal, asking for roughly $100 million to the state of Iowa, our state leadership took out all mention of climate and climate change in the proposal. So from a state perspective, we certainly don't.
And when you, because I know they're going to throw us all out of here to say, you'd mentioned what do you think the valley might look like 150 or 200 years from now? What is the range of possibilities?
Well, I mean, I really think the range of possibilities is to go back and do restorations on the land, you know, that bring, you know, natural function back into the landscape. And we need to find a balance between agricultural, economic, water, environmental, and human resources to make this state a livable state 50 years from now. So somehow we got to bring those together. We can't just focus it only on one or two of those 5 resources. Those 5 are all connected.
I think we need to go see, we got a little walking tour.
Great.
So, yeah.
Quick walking tour and then.
Yeah.
A quick walking tour so you can see
Great.
some of the other things
Thanks,
done at
guys.
Stanley Hydraulic Labs.
I should say, you know, my interest in this in part comes from the fact that we were hammered in Colorado in 2013.
Yeah.
Obviously, the conditions there are really different, but the flooding, I mean, it was a torrential rain in 24 hours that created an unbelievable
And
economic.
I saw it
primarily, yeah, I actually saw it firsthand too. Primarily Boulder and then down the valley along the Platte. Is that?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Sterling got hammered. I remember.
Oh, yeah.
I stopped on the rest area there and saw all the
Everything, all the
buildings
it's an
damaged.
Amazing thing to see.
It is heartbreaking when you've lived it.
Yeah.
Like we lived in Cedar Rapids.
Right.
It's just
See it
heartbreaking to
again.
see. It's
Yeah.
just heartbreaking every time you see it because even, you know, we didn't have, the miracle was we had nobody die in the flood of 2008. But when you have 20,000 people evacuated, 1,000 businesses,
Yeah.
churches, nonprofits flooded, for the heartache, it's economic devastation, but it's emotional heartache. Really, really hard thing to live through.
It is, and it was when we were flooded in 13 and everybody was coming together to deal with it, just like you guys came together to deal with it. In our case, the federal government was shut down.
Wow.
Which just shows you something about
Yeah.
something.
Terrible.